but backed by a guarantee of full faith and credit from the US government into international development projects. And every year, OPEC returns more money than it receives from the federal government. Every single dollar that OPEC invests is a loan dollar, which means every single dollar comes back. Now, credit is not enough. You have to have a certain amount of equity from USAID in capacity development and a bunch of other things that don't have an automatic return. But OPEC has done a very good job for 32 years in making investments in developing countries, creating a huge amount of economic development and earning dollars back. Couldn't do it, I mean, can't do it with credit alone, but every time you use credit, that's not something you need to wean anybody off of. And I totally agree that co-ops are the best return on an investment that you could possibly have.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Now, I got to get a plug in here for CHF along these same lines, because I think it's one of the most fascinating stories that has involved our activity. We've got many stories. I know all of you have too, but you know, at the time that Iraq was invaded and the two sons of Saddam were trying to get out of the country, they got intercepted at the Syrian border. And they got away that time, but they left in their SUVs. They had $8 million in $100 bills. And the US government took it over, but they came to CHF and said, you know, this money belongs to the Iraqis. And we want you to set up a loan program for the benefit of the Iraqis. And the gal that we had in Iraq, living in Iraq at the time, was from Minnesota, so I have a little proprietary interest. Kim Tillock, can you imagine they delivered $8 million in sea bags to her apartment and gave her the responsibility to start lending the money, which she did. The first loan was for $300 to a woman to buy a sewing machine. She paid it back and bought additional sewing machines, added additional employees and whatnot. Is doing very well. We've been lending to the poorest of the poor. And one of the stories out of Fallujah, you remember when that city was blown away? We had $15 million loaned in Fallujah. And we thought we'd kiss goodbye to it because there was no collateral. It was all on faith. There was no obligation. Those people in Fallujah paid back every dime. And we went to them, and universally it came back, and they said, you know, we've never had a source of credit before, and we don't want to lose it. Today, that fund is owned, controlled, managed by the Iraqis. It has grown to $46 million, because the interest rates, you know, in those countries are pretty high, but it's grown to $46 million. But the thing that's just amazing for me, because I've been involved in banking during my career, the non-performing loans on that $46 million amounted to $14,000. It's less than 0.3%. And this is an institution that's owned and controlled by the people it serves, a cooperative. I tell that story because I get excited when you can see what cooperatives can do in the developing world. Now, do we have more questions?
My name is Eric DeLuca. I'm the program manager for the International Year of Cooperatives in the US. And my question is for Claudia from the National Farmers Union. When I've spoken to people involved in the farmer-to-farmer program, I've noticed insights that could potentially be relevant for one of the trends we're seeing in US agriculture. We've got a lot of really strong agricultural cooperatives, and there's also a trend right now towards reinvigorating local and regional food systems. And I was just curious if you had any insights that might be relevant to what you see in terms of increasing community interest in supporting farmers in the U.S. and how that dialogue can be two-way.
Is your question in regard to the U.S. or is it in regard to international development?
Well, I think it's in thinking about your experience in traveling to Senegal and then your day-to-day experience working with farmers in the U.S. and if there are things that would be relevant in terms of what is emerging in the U.S. of strengthening local and regional food systems and how that could contribute to a dialogue in both directions.
Yeah, thank you very much for that clarification. No doubt about it. Everything that brings together the communities across the U.S. that increase interest and priorities on local food, all of that expertise that's developing just plays so well into exactly what many of the needs were in Senegal. And I think you raise a really good question about what is happening there and how can it be played back here. I saw an interesting community. I mean, this is a long ways away from Dakar, so we go by Jeep. It's their road, but it feels like it's just the deserts of Arizona, perhaps, and things are going to blossom, they tell me, when the rains come, but it's not evident. But once we're there, and we get the community leaders around, in that setting, we saw co-op efforts at the banking level, and this is out in the middle of really no place. We saw co-op efforts in regard to small engine repair, which I think is a pressing issue as we try to create sustainability. And interestingly enough, we saw a co-op restaurant out there as well. So in a way, it brought back, and we happen to have a lady from, president actually of New England Farmers Union there, but it almost encourages each other to create more sustainability that's within the local infrastructure, and that not everything has to come from 2,000 miles away that is your food supply. I think it's a marvelous opportunity in current times to send some of our regional co-op leaders to these countries and vice versa. I mean, they're starting to think in ways that are much more local here, and that's what exactly is needed there.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions over here?
I'm Christina Jennings with North Country Cooperative Development Fund. So thank you for your comments. And I'm hesitant to follow up with after Eric because I think we're sort of on the same line. But let me take his question a little bit further. My question was really around, given the challenges that have been noted that are common to co-ops in the U.S. and internationally, and given the work that's being done very effectively to fight poverty and address economic development needs in other countries, what other lessons beyond the food systems could we take back to our cooperative work here in this country? And that's for anyone who's willing to try to answer that.
Do we have a taker on this?
I guess I mentioned one, which had to do with the governance piece, some of the prescription of your constitution that we involve more people. We serve customers here in America. The electric cooperatives serve customers all across the states, a very diverse population that we serve. But if you look at the makeup of our governance, it's primarily white Caucasian males. I mean, that's just the reality. And it's unfortunate in some respects because it doesn't reflect the true membership of the cooperative, and it should. And so when I see efforts in Uganda and other countries where they prescribe a solution to that before they even start, that's heartwarming and something that we should think about modeling in our own country.
Another question over here? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Webster Walker, and I am here with SLICE, Strengthening Local Independent Co-ops Everywhere. This is a question for Dennis Hill. It was inspiring to hear about the installation of, I believe he said 70 megawatts of renewable energy in Costa Rica. Hearing the Honorable Minister speak about the impacts of climate change on agriculture in her country and the real impacts that are happening to society and to people and to agriculture, obviously not just there, but everywhere in the world. I'm wondering if your organization in its work internationally on installing energy has any specific commitments to carbon accounting or to setting goals and increasing the percentage of renewable energy that is installed internationally.
Well, it's a very good question. I don't know that there is a number or that kind of tracking that goes on. Most of that impetus for that comes from the country itself or from the resources that they have available. We were able to see a project in Uganda where they were installing a massive hydro project. Of course, that is, you know, America's, or the world, some of the world's cleanest and most renewable source of energy, carbon-free. It's a wonderful project. Of course, it comes at a cost as well. We stood in an area where there were, you know, many homes, and those folks knew that they had X amount of time to relocate because they would become part of a permanent flood, and they had to, you know, understand that and were willing to move on. The renewable projects, I think, that are most available are generally wind projects. I think in some smaller cases there can be some biomass projects that are available. You know, it's one project at a time, I think, is the answer. I don't think any of these developing countries would go carbon-free with nuclear. I don't see that on the radar screen for them. It would be more indigenous fuels, whether that's wind, water, coal, oil, and a fair amount of natural gas at this point. So I guess that's you know, the answer that I'd give at this point. In our own state of North Dakota, we are called the Saudi Arabia of wind energy, and we have invested a fair amount in wind. We don't own a lot of wind. The electric cooperatives don't own a lot of wind because the economics of it are that the production tax credit makes wind very more affordable than it is. As cooperatives with no corporate income tax liability, we don't have any appetite for those tax credits. So it's very difficult for a cooperative to own that wind. We, in turn, then are basically buying it from for-profit entities that sell us their output, and then they can claim the tax credit. So they're harvesting tax credits, we're harvesting the wind and selling it to the customers. We have probably close to 1,200 megawatts of installed wind in the two Dakotas right now, and only 150 megawatts of it is owned by a cooperative. The rest is all owned by NextEra Energy out of Florida and other providers. So, but more to come.
It will be a bit outside the, so is it, outside the work that Dunhill does, but where you have the dairy cooperatives, you have biogas. You will find that in those areas you will have lighting because of the biogas. You will get gas to cook because of the biogas.
You have a question over here?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Ed Potter, and I'm with the International Cooperative Mutual Insurance Federation. And I have a question for Dennis. A couple years ago, the OCDC wrote a paper called Pathways, and it was a way to describe what cooperatives do to promote international development. They talked about a social pathway, an economic pathway, and a democratic pathway. I want to focus on the democratic pathway because that's, I think, one that's both a challenge and opportunity for us today. You did some training on board training and that sort of thing. Sometimes governance is seen as the Achilles heel of the cooperative movement. If we don't get this right, we're not going to get anything right. And in fact, that's what really distinguishes us from the investor-owner models. And could you comment on that? And if any other member on the panel has experiences in the area of governance and working on that, your challenges and opportunities?
Well, it's an interesting question, and again, I just have one life experience that I can speak to the most. I have heard generally from some others who have worked in these countries. I commend NRECA for making part of their service offerings governance training. I mean, it's as important as the design of the system, how are we going to get electrons from point A to point B, what's the economics of the system. I mean, that's all important too, don't get me wrong, but at some point you have to have these places well governed and well managed. The two boards that we worked with really accepted their responsibility with passion. They took it really seriously, which was encouraging to see. of the consultants that I worked with over there, talked about their experiences in Bangladesh and the Philippines, the other countries, and though they too take this very, very seriously. It was interesting for me to see how the president of the one board in Uganda just seemed so engaged. I mean, he talked openly about his connection with the people in his community and how he needed to hear them out and represent them and make sure that they were heard. And same things we talk about in America. And so it catches on very, very quickly. I mean, it's not a hard concept to get through. But it is important, I think, as all of us engage in this international work and in other countries, that governance practice is very, very important. And sadly, here in America, we have some horrible examples of governance at both the for-profit and the cooperative level. And in our own cooperative world, there are some things that just, you know, oh man, why did they do that? You can't defend it. I mean, it's just undefensible, the way we know cooperative governance anyway. So, but it needs to be a very important piece when we engage in these activities in whatever sector it is. If you're not going to care about that, then your cooperative probably isn't very long for the world.
And if I could add, I found that to be a common request of the folks in Senegal to literally ask for that training. And in other words, it's clearly identified. They already have the structures that need good governance, and they literally are asking for the training. And I would underscore here, this is a great opportunity to offer training to women. It may be exactly what they need to have confidence, to be on boards, and then pop through, if there is such a thing, and I'm sure it is, the glass ceiling there. Any of you that are willing to provide such training, the CNCR in Senegal really is asking for that kind of help, both on governance and women in governance. So at least it's on their consciousness clearly.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Tracy Lloyd McCurdy, and I am the policy advisor for the Rural Coalition, which is based here in Washington, D.C. My question is with respect to the impact of GMO seed on indigenous agricultural systems, local biodiversity, and subsistence farming. And the concern is that oftentimes with U.S. aid, it's used as a strategic pathway to introduce GMO seed into indigenous agricultural systems. And so my question is actually for the Assistant Minister of Kenya. You spoke about the maize program and receiving aid. And is there a robust debate in Kenya regarding if GMO seed is actually beneficial to the farmer? And does it create a cycle of dependency?
Thank you very much. Definitely, you must have been watching the news in Kenya, especially. There is such a big debate, and we have not yet reached the conclusion. We are divided in Parliament. There are those who are pro-GMOs. There are those who are against. The Minister of Agriculture tries to say it is okay. The others are saying it is not okay. So definitely, I am on the no side. So I might be biased in my answer. Because definitely it will create a dependency as far as seed is concerned. I may not have a clear answer because we have not reached a conclusion. But previously, before you did ask your question, I didn't get the opportunity to answer the pathways. If I may take this opportunity also to answer the gentleman who asked about the 3 pathways of governance, economic, and social. And in my presentation, I did say that we have a youth component from the USAID, and sometime in March, the US ambassador to Kenya launched the Yes Youth Can in my country. It's a desk in our ministry. We are reaching out to the youth. Because of lack of unemployment, we don't want the youth to engage in illegal activities. So as a ministry, we've gone ahead to form youth groups in all the constituencies. And they have elected members, they are leaders. And we train them on governance, It's referred to them as the leaders of tomorrow. And we also train them on business models that they can be the job creators themselves instead of being job seekers. It was started in 2009, and basically this is an area, as Claudia had put, where we require more to be done to train the youth. We have not diversified now into the older people, but as a ministry, our work basically is to build the capacity of cooperatives, either in governance, on ethics issues, and how to mobilize their resources together. That is an area where, despite us having a ministry, Woku came ahead and went to the rural villages in Kisumu to work with the widows to form their own cooperatives. And we all agree that cooperatives is about telling people to believe in themselves, that they can come together and make a difference in their environment. And so we have that component which needs to be developed, especially for the youth, and brand them for tomorrow. And also for the youth to embrace the cooperative model. You will find most of the cooperators are older people. We just have an example in Benjamin, and sorry, your father formed the cooperatives, but you have not taken after the footsteps of your father.
I'm thinking I'm becoming a diplomat. Of his footsteps.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Randy, did you want to add something? Okay. Barbara, did you have a question?
I think the
Oh, I'm sorry, over here. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Perry Letson. I'm with ACDI VOCA. I do have a question, but I wanted to also just follow up on the earlier question about sustainability, how we wean countries from foreign aid. And as has been pointed out, the IFCO logo type is on the banners, and we've heard references to IFCO. They sit on our board. They've been members of our organization since we too helped found them. And it's such a great story. I just want to direct people over to our booth where we have written up the IFCO story, our version. It was founded at a time when famine was predicted for the subcontinent. And the U.S. co-op community, we should all be proud of this, actually donated $1 million in addition to the USAID and Government of India funding that went into founding what is now the largest fertilizer company in Asia. It's a great success story, and I think because it's a self-sustaining organization that's thrived, it's a great example of the success of foreign aid. We've got other such organizations around the world we can point to. We can point to countries that used to receive foreign aid and have graduated. South Korea, and Taiwan, and so many others. But I do have a question, and it has to do with the term cooperative. Some of the panelists have experience in the former Soviet Union, and I wonder if they could comment on the sensitivity surrounding the name cooperative, because we're proud members of the community, and we think that it, the name cooperative has a halo around it, and yet in some parts of the world that name prompts fear and loathing, because co-ops are associated with statist organizations, government control, and they're bad things. So I wonder how we get around that, what your experience is, and maybe Dame Green could comment on whether this has been part of the branding effort for the IYC, whether they've thought about what the name cooperatives implies in various places. Thank you.
Maybe I'll take part of it.
Yep, go ahead.
I've done a lot of work in the Soviet Union after the collapse, Kazakhstan, and a lot of the Eastern European countries that were under the communist domination. And we ran into that problem when we talked about cooperatives, because the cooperatives were state-owned and controlled institutions under the communist system. And, you know, I had a little difficulty with that, trying to talk about the value of a cooperative, what you can do working together and whatnot. But we finally, what we did to address that, we changed the terminology and we said mutual aid associations. And that's the way we got over that initial obstacle as relates to cooperatives. When we talked about cooperatives, immediately they thought of the government and they didn't want any part of it. But when we talked about mutual aid, then they were interested in moving ahead. And I don't know if that's of any value.
Well, in our state, we have a rich history with cooperatives and cooperative development. We have history that included a long period after the Great Depression where farmers were so angry they couldn't see straight, and they did some very radical things, which are very exciting. And they created their own political party, the NPL, the Nonpartisan League, took over state government for many, many years. And when they were in total control of that, they created a state-owned bank and a state-owned mill and elevator, which still operate today. And so, you know, you may decry the socialism or government-run enterprise or whatever, but I have to say our state-owned bank turns back to the people of North Dakota something of like $70 to $80 million a year in profits that go into the general fund that we can use for other purposes. And the state-owned mill, as Roger Johnson would know, has also been a very successful enterprise for our state, so it works pretty well. Having said all that, I mean, there are always those few that just equate us to this outdated, government-run, government-sponsored, you can't get on your own, and you know, you shouldn't even exist anymore. But over time, I think we have earned a very good name in our state, and I can speak most specifically for the electric cooperatives. We do public attitude surveying every 2 years, and we survey all the people in North Dakota to ask them about certain energy and economic development type questions. We always ask the question, if you had a choice, and it's a big if, because frankly people don't in North Dakota, but if you had a choice to choose your electric supplier, you know, who would you prefer to be served by? And by a 2-to-1 margin, people say cooperatives over the investor-owned utilities. And that's even though that we only serve about 1/3 of the state's population. So we play way bigger than our weight in terms of public attitude. And I think that's because people over time have recognized we're here to stay, we're not going anywhere. You can call us and you can get somebody to answer the phone. You don't have to go through a menu of checklists, you know, to find the right person. And so those things start to matter over time. And so we're still using cooperative, and we're flying the flag as proudly as we possibly can.
Pauline, did you want to add to that?
It's actually a very good question, because there are whole swathes of Eastern Central Europe where the word cooperative carried all that baggage. But a lot of them are now within the European Union. And the founding Treaty of Rome, the founding treaty of the European Union, is quite specific that there must be the capacity for the cooperative movement to flourish. So, of course, for those countries, there's a real tool, because we have been working with them in the ICA, and particularly Cooperatives Europe, which covers that area, which is the European region of the ICA. And they've been working with the new cooperative movements to make sure that they're fully up to date, that their governance is good, that they're independent, autonomous, and they keep an active membership policy going. And in many of those countries now, that mood is turning round. So, and I know that there's a situation as well in some parts of Africa where the word cooperative carries that same sort of baggage from a different perspective. Personally, I think the way we get around it is by all of us who operate in good cooperatives, and I was very heartened by what you said, Dennis. We stand up and say, we're cooperatives, we know how they run. In the ICA, we've always had every part of the world within our organisation. So during the Cold War, we had both sides of the Iron Curtain. We kept them, even though the cooperative movement then was dominated by the government. We kept them within the fold so that we could keep talking to them and keep changing it and moving on. And because of that, when the Iron Curtain fell, we were able to work with the same colleagues and renew them and renew the cooperative movement. And I hope that we can do the same in the same way. I must say that we have kept people in the cooperative movement in Christian countries, in Islamic countries, in Jewish countries. We have kept them within the ICA. So I think what we're doing is, if we keep on saying we run good cooperatives, this is how they work, and you keep standing up and be proud of what you're doing, I think you begin to impact on other people in the world who can see how it should be. And for me, that's the key thing, and that's why I so like what you said, Dennis.
Thank you. Barbara, no, you've been waiting a long time.
That's okay. Thank you. I'm Barbara Tohorska-Jones with CHF International. And my question is to our international guests. There is a lot of talk nowadays about the South-to-South exchange, apart from learning from the experiences of the developed countries, also the need for learning and for closer collaboration in between the South and South developing countries themselves. And my question would be, are there any specific regional initiatives that would point to the reasons and the value of such experiences? What comes to mind, for example, is talking about the customs laws in the continent of Africa and what incredible burdens and barriers to trade in between countries are caused by that. So if you would to comment, please, on any of those topics, that would be great.
In Kenya, we have the EALA East Africa. That is 5 countries. And what's happening is the two countries, the various countries that form the East Africa community came up with EALA, East Africa Legislative Assembly. So we have our own parliamentarians from the countries that form the East Africa region. And our ministers of trade occasionally have to meet, and sometimes an officer manning an entry point will require tax and brings challenges. But this is something that it's being worked on. So we have free movement of trade. We don't have those challenges in East Africa. We have not yet gone to South. If we have gone to South, is to go and train them on cooperatives, considering that Kenya is #1 in Africa. We have many nations of Africa calling on us to go and help them to develop cooperatives. Zimbabwe, we have South Africa, the other time Botswana were there. So there's a lot that they learn from us.
I'm not sure if I know, but under the OIC, under the Organization of Islamic Countries, there is a subgroup formed. It's called the Developing Aid. That's Indonesia is there, Turkey, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and one of the chapter or issue is addressed is regarding small and medium enterprises, small and micro enterprises. I think that may include also collaboration of cooperatives. I need to do more research on that. I don't know exactly, but that's as far as I know.
There's something else that maybe I need to mention is we have an organization called Asada, East and South Africa Dairy Association. This is basically business people who deal in dairy products or dairy cooperatives, and they exchange ideas when it comes to trading. Then the taxes do apply. One of the East Africa community countries, Rwanda, came to learn from Kenya. We sent officers also to train them, and their dairy sector is threatening to overtake the Kenyan dairy sector. The first animals they took from us. So I think the issue of exchanging and networking with your neighbors has really helped Rwanda to develop in their dairy sector. We have the Cooperative Bank in Kenya, which we are now taking to Sudan to form the Cooperative Bank in Sudan. So there's a lot of sharing of information and learning from one another, really, as cooperators, would be the best way to develop faster.
We have a question over here, and I think we're getting close.
Yeah, I realize we're reaching the appointed hour. My name's Brian Heenahan. I work at Cornell University. And my comment, and I don't think anyone's broached it, is please invest in your universities and colleges. I know North Dakota and South Dakota both have courses on cooperatives and support applied research on cooperatives. It can be a great resource. We're inducting Professor Mike Cook tonight, who's added a lot of knowledge to the whole issue of governance, the role of boards, board management relations, and those kinds of things. So I'm not sure how universities operate in either Kenya or Indonesia, but I'd encourage you to support cooperative education at that level. The other observation, I serve as secretary of the Northeast Cooperative Council, and you alluded to it, that cooperatives can learn a lot from each other. And you see this, NCBA's come up, OCDC's come up, and again, I don't know what types of associations you might have within your countries, but my observation has been that many cooperative directors and managers and members have learned from each other within an association. So I guess the question is, how do you relate to universities in your countries, and are there associations that contribute within your countries?
We have Cooperative Insurance in Kenya, CIC, and it has a lot of work with the university students. It might not have, it hasn't expanded to all the universities, but that is the only organization that I have seen going so far. And I do agree that we need to invest in our universities on cooperatives.
Yeah, I'd add to that not only North and South Dakota, but the University in Wisconsin has an excellent program. You know, recently I was in Uganda, and that question was posed of me: who can we contact in the United States that can help us with cooperative education? And I did refer them, in all due respect, to the University of Wisconsin.
If I may.
Yeah.
In Indonesia, it's starting from primary school, elementary school, that we are taught of a subject of cooperatives that is built in the curriculum.
Yeah.
So it's because it is the basic it's a basic teaching of trading of business. I mean and sense of common togetherness. You know, I don't know the correct word to pick. I'm sorry, but that's and it starts always with we call it simpan and pinjam. You deposit what you are saving and lending. So amongst the community of the class, they built a common fund, you know, where you save, and then some of those who need to buy for books, for pencil, for they can opt for lending it from that, and it's in the curriculum, and moreover, in the universities, it's practiced more broader. Yeah. If you're, for example, in the faculty of agriculture, or you do how cocoa business is being done through cooperatives, how crops trading, this is, because we were just I think introduced through modern trading, like free trade and open trade. That's just recently, but our founding fathers taught us more on this type of.
Well, thank you so much. Liz is up here. Liz has got the hook now. She's going to pull us off.
Well, it is approaching that hour. Yeah, but I think we've had such a great conversation across so many topics that relate. I think we've learned a lot about the international side, but I think it's also brought home how much we have in common from both the U.S. and the international side, and what we can learn from you. I think we need to learn what the Indonesian education system is doing with respect to cooperative education, that there's some good opportunities that we can all learn from each other. And we thank you all for being part of this program. I think it's really been for us a good opportunity to really focus on the international side of the U.S. cooperative development world. I would like to make one comment too about the image of cooperatives around the country. Ironically, I wasn't intending to mention it here, but we are announcing today the results of a survey that the Consumer Federation of America and NCBA collectively did of consumers in terms of their attitudes towards cooperatives compared to for-profit businesses. And the survey was done by Opinion Research Center in the middle of April. And consistently, cooperatives are still outperforming the for-profit businesses that are polled in terms of who do you trust, who do you believe, all those kinds of things that are the value that we associate with what a cooperative is about. We're going to be developing a white paper around these survey results too, so that we better understand them. But I think in spite of whatever you call it, there still is that connection where consumers are seeing the value and recognizing that value. So we may call it an association, a cooperative, whatever, there still is that value. I would like to give Paul a chance to make some closing comments too, since it is a OCDC event as well.
Thanks, Liz. I want to thank everyone for participating today, and especially the panel. When we talk to donors about the role of cooperatives in international development, we often stress to them that here in the U.S. we have 120 million members of cooperatives, and we have a lot of expertise that we can provide to people around the world. And you heard a lot of good examples today of some of the OCDC members and the work that they do. But I especially want to call out Gordon and Claudia and Dennis. Taking your volunteer time and your work that you've committed to this, you're a real example and hero to me, and I'm sure to people in the room for the work that you've done. So I really appreciate that. 3 of our members at OCDC didn't get mentioned today in all the discussions, and I want to recognize them. Health Partners, which is an Upper Midwest healthcare cooperative, is conducting programs in India. They're consumer-owned. CRI, which is a farmer-owned cooperative that works in agricultural development. And CCI, Communications Cooperative Incorporated, is a worker cooperative that works in telecommunications. All of the OCDC members have booths next door, and you can learn more about all their programs and learn, more importantly, how you can get involved or how you can get your cooperative involved in doing the type of work that we've heard about today. So I'd really encourage you next door at the reception just to go by those booths and see how you might be able to support these programs and get involved. So Liz, closing comments, but thank you all for coming today.
I have nothing more to say except thank you for being here. And the reception starts officially at 5. So there's time to go look at the information at the OCDC materials, and there's also information on CDF there as well. So take your time, enjoy more conversation. Like I say, we need to move it down the hall, so keep the conversation going, but just somewhere else. Thank you very much.